Michelle Ballantyne is our first guest. She's the leader of Reform UK Scotland, and she joins us now. Michelle, as far as you see it, thanks for joining us on GB News. As far as you see it, has Scotland made the right decision? Should the rest of the UK follow?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I think, first of all, it's been introduced without real thought. I mean, they've gone ahead and voted it through, but without even a proper definition of where they're going to apply it. But I think, secondly, and perhaps much more importantly, this is the beginning of a continuation that could be very dangerous for our civil liberties. I mean, a vaccine passport doesn't say that you haven't got COVID, that you can't spread COVID. It simply says you've been vaccinated and therefore you've protected yourself. And to ask people to evidence that is in effect starting to say you must have medical procedures when we require you to have them if you wish to participate in society. And that is something that we have never, ever done before. We have never imposed that kind of obligation on our society. And once we start doing that, where do we go next? What do we require you to have next? What we will say that you have to comply with in order to participate in our civic activities. I think it's a small step, but it's a dangerous step. And it's one that could lead to places we really don't want to go.
Michelle, it is quite tightly regulated in the sense that we're only talking about really large events where people will be in close proximity. There is an argument that it may enable venues to stay open if cases continue to rise as we approach winter.
Well, as I said, there's several things about that. First of all, having a vaccine passport does not say I am not carrying COVID and I could not spread COVID in this venue. It gives no guarantees around that at all. It simply says that you've been vaccinated. And we know from all the figures that are coming through at the moment that many people who currently have COVID or who are in hospital with COVID actually have already been vaccinated. So this isn't a protection against the spread of COVID. This is simply a sort of knee-jerk reaction again to saying we aren't brave enough to make the decisions that need to be made. And it's also about controlling the population. And it's a way of trying to enforce, particularly young people, which are the cohort as yet that haven't been vaccinated, to get vaccinated, despite the fact that their risk from COVID is actually extremely low. And as the JVCI has actually said, actually, the risk from having the vaccine is bigger than the risk from actually getting COVID to young people, and particularly children. So I think this is an unnecessary, very unnecessary step that the government are taking, but it is opening a door to potentially starting to dictate an awful lot of other things down the line. And the population has been quite supplicant during this whole COVID crisis. And I think it's time we stood up and said, well, hang on a minute. We have voluntarily done the things that we think are important. But once you start imposing them, once you start saying that, you could only do certain things with our permission, if you take on board and do the things that we have decided you're going to do, then we start to erode those civil liberties.
Michelle, in her latest COVID sort of situation report, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, she pointed out that cases in Scotland were quite sharply up. She also acknowledged that testing was up, so that we're testing more people north of the border, but cases are still quite alarming. Surely she had to do something. There's still a lot of fear about COVID, whether we like it or not. As Gloria says, perhaps these vaccine passports can encourage people to go to these mass events that mean so much to us as human beings, helping us to mix, get the economy moving, feel at least as if we're getting back to normal.
Well, the fear that people are feeling, a lot of it was created by government in the first place. And I suspect you would find that actually people will attend these events with or without COVID passports being required. So this is not about allowing these events to take place because people won't attend. You only have to look at the Euros or, the events that have been going on. It is not going to stop people attending if you don't have to have a vaccine passport. The vaccine passport is a way of government imposing something onto the people that it sort of exercises their control, but it's not really protecting you. And this is where I have a problem with a lot of the COVID regulations. They're not really protecting people They are actions that the government is taking for whatever reason they feel that they want to take them. But it is primarily to be seen to be doing something or to exercise that broader control over the population. It is not really going to actually help in any shape or form in terms of the public health concerns. But they are trying to unpick the fear they've created. That is very true. But I think that one of the best ways to unpick the fear you've created is to be straightforward about what we're dealing with. And actually, for young people and in fact, the majority of people, COVID is not a death risk. You know, your percentage risk from COVID in terms of death is extremely small. And yet it has been painted as something that's going to kill you if you come into touch with it. And I think they need to start reversing that conversation and start having a much more realistic conversation with people. Because actually, COVID is not number one on the list for killing you. In fact, I think it's down to about number 11 now. And yet they're not taking anything like the steps to protect you from everything else that might kill you. It is a bit of a nonsense, really, now.
Michelle, the basis of your argument is one about governments exerting control. You reference an attack on civil liberties. But actually, just questioning that whole foundation, lockdown, I mean, what a massive infringement on our civil liberties.
Absolutely.
It was hugely popular and had mass public support. That's the reality.
Yeah, because people were frightened. I mean, what we saw during the whole COVID pandemic was the use of psychology to, instead of calm people's fear, you know, allow them to cope with it in a way that was measured and realistic. What they did was they harnessed everything we know about psychology and they enhanced and increased people's fear in order to control how the population actually behaved. And that there is an awful lot of information out there now around this, and anybody who's studied psychology, who understands anything about how the human brain works, could see what was actually happening. And what they've done now is they've got themselves in a situation where people are terrified. The mental health of our population has declined enormously. People think that they've stepped outside, if they have any contact with people, that they're going to contract this horrendous illness that's going to kill them. And that just doesn't stand up either statistically or realistically in terms of how viruses operate and in terms of how COVID has in fact swept through the population. Yes, we needed to take precautions, and yes, we needed to make certain adjustments to our life while we managed the build-up of the virus and the treatment of the virus. But now it's got completely out of control. The government are struggling on how to bring us back to normality. And I think imposing things like vaccine passports does not bring us back to some normality. It just enhances the problems we've already got. And as I said, it takes a step down a route where the government can start to say, this class of person is acceptable, that class of person isn't acceptable. And once we go down that route, we are entering dangerous territory.
Michelle Ballantyne, good to talk to you. We appreciate you appearing on GB News. Michelle Ballantyne there of Reform UK Scotland. Have a good weekend.
Now, one of the areas that will be most affected by the introduction of vaccine passports would be nightclubs. Michael Kill is the CEO of the Nighttime Industries Association and joins us now. Hello, Michael. Nice to see you again. Thank you for your time. There is an argument which suggests that industries like your own, nightclubs, they may be better served by this because you're not going to be shut down. In fact, it may enable you to stay open should cases and hospitalisations continue to grow as we approach the winter.
I mean, it's an interesting perspective. I mean, we saw with Scottish Government yesterday, particularly in Holyrood, that there were lots of unanswered questions. And the key thing that we alluded to is there wasn't a great deal of evidence that was passed across from either the First Minister or the Deputy First Minister or anyone in support. The challenge that we have more than anything is the spike in cases have come about mainly due to schools returning. And we've seen that many of our businesses have done an amazing job keeping people safe, looking at risk assessments, using lateral flow tests to get people into their spaces, looking at hygiene, sanitation levels. So we've done a fantastic job. And, you know, as we saw Jeff Ellis yesterday being commended by Scottish Government because of his stringent public health strategy around Transmit Festival that happens this weekend. Our industry has gone over and above to facilitate the best position. What we don't understand is why we're being marginalised as a sector, and particularly as the government are highlighting nightclubs. they can't ascertain a position or really understand what the definition of a nightclub is. So we're already concerned about things like market distortion, displacement, and loads of challenges around the way that they're trying to drive this forward, particularly as what they put forward yesterday was very vague.
Michael, good to have you back on our show. So I've got two teenage kids, one in their early 20s. I mean, they went out very quickly and got the jab precisely so they could go clubbing, so they could go to festivals and all the rest of it in case a requirement like this came in. Do you really think it will kill the vibe of a nightclub if you have to show a vaccine passport before you go in? This is going to be, a Q code on a smartphone. With the right technology, it could be made to work, couldn't it?
I think there are some clear challenges. The feedback that we've had from our members is that when you talk about this and you talk about nightclubs, how do you define a nightclub? When you look at a late bar or a pub, there are similar proximity and contact environments, and they're being excluded from this mitigation. The other thing that we've got to really concede to and really understand is we've seen in France almost a 40% drop-off in trade in things like restaurateurs because of this pass, and we're estimating that we're going to lose at least 30% of trade out there. I think the big thing that we've really got to consider here is what proportion do nightclubs make up of the nighttime economy in Scotland. Across the UK, it's just over 10%. So what is going to be the impact of actually focusing so much on nightclubs, given that we're very aware that there are other environments that are sort of stronger infection beds? And the other thing is some people will make the decision, right or wrong, and it's not for me to say, to either be vaccinated or not. If they don't want to be vaccinated and they're being hindered or stopped from accessing cultural spaces or social engagement, they're going to find it elsewhere. Those environments are going to be a lot tougher to manage and going to put pressure on not only the emergency services, but also policing. So there needs to be a consideration in terms of the societal displacement of what's going to happen with this mitigation coming in place.
Nightclubs were the last to open. Do you worry that as cases continue to rise and as do hospitalisation, that you would be the first to close again? How big a worry is that?
There is an extreme worry about it. I mean, look, let's be really honest about it. Our industry has made some of the biggest sacrifices here. There were 1,446 nightclubs across the UK before this pandemic. There's now less than 1,000. So we've lost a phenomenal amount of industry. We've lost a phenomenal amount of people who have lost their livelihoods, their jobs, over 600,000 people. These businesses have really worked hard to toe the line to support the public health strategy. They should be given an equal opportunity to be able to trade. If they're doing it the right way, then I believe that they should be given that opportunity to move forward. This further mitigation, I don't think is substantiated in any evidence that we've seen moving forward. If anything, it's of the contrary. So the concern is yes, this is going to hit business very hard. We potentially are going to lose more, and I think it's a dangerous path that we're going down, particularly in Scotland. And I would hope that the lessons in terms of the backlash in Scotland are seen by Westminster, and they will make a stronger, smarter decision to avoid this mitigation in terms of England.
The reality is, though, Michael, isn't it, as we've seen throughout this pandemic, what Nicola Sturgeon does, Boris Johnson often quickly follows. He doesn't want to be seen to be behind the curve in terms of, quotes, keeping the public safe. With the best will in the world, what are you telling your members as CEO of the Nighttime Industries Association? This is coming to the rest of the UK too, right?
Well, we're concerned that it's something that definitely the government departments are suggesting is not decided yet. We are presenting some very, very strong evidence from a public health perspective, as well as an industry perspective, economically, communities, etc. But I mean, I'll draw you back to Michael Gove's comment, which I think sort of resonates with me more importantly, is the impact of this mitigation on the industry greatly outweighs the public health benefit. That was a statement that Michael Gove made. And the other thing that I really want to sort of present is, do we want to be in a position, and this is where we are, that it is going to be easier in terms of the mitigating measures to get in internationally on a flight to Scotland than it is to be able to access a domestic nightclub? I mean, that's a surreal thought as it sits.
I'm going to ask you a cheeky question now. I hope you don't mind. Did Michael Gove go into a nightclub and being snapped in a nightclub, was that good or bad PR for the nightclub industry?
I think it was good PR. The fact that we saw a Conservative Party minister go in and experience a nightclub was fantastic. I mean, you know, let's be honest about it. He had plenty of room to move, contrary to popular belief.
What a mover! What a mover he was! Did you see that?
I know. I think the interesting part is I love the fact that he actually tried to blag the entry fee off the back position. I mean, that really was a fantastic moment.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.